West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
New York prosecutors telling a top Trump Organization executive he is safe for now. The decision not to pursue charges against Matthew Calamari comes as the Manhattan DA's office intensifies its criminal investigation of the Trump business in other ways. CNN's Kara Scannell, who's been all over this story, joins me early on this Thanksgiving morning with this important reporting. Kara.
Yeah, John. So we have learned that the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, which is investigating the Trump Organization, has told one of its top executives, someone who is so loyal to the former president, Matthew Calamari, that they will not bring criminal charges against him for now. Now, he is under investigation as part of this off-the-books compensation scheme. The question whether he paid the appropriate taxes on corporate apartments, company cars. This indicates that they're not trying to get him to flip. Because you'll remember with Alan Weisselberg, the chief financial officer, they really were pressuring him to try to cooperate. He didn't. He was charged with this tax fraud scheme along with the Trump Organization. They both have pleaded not guilty. So this indicates prosecutors are really shifting away from that tax investigation and back to the original focus, which has been valuations. How did the Trump Organization value certain of its properties, office buildings, hotels, golf courses? And the issue here is, were they giving banks, lenders, even when they're trying to get tax deductions, were they inflating the value of those assets? And then at those same assets, were they then giving an artificially low value when it came time to pay taxes? Now, this investigation has been going on for years, and the Manhattan DA, Cyrus Vance Jr., his term is up in 5 weeks. So the clock is ticking on, because he has wanted to make a decision on this before he's left office. Now, it's not clear if he will, but we're in the crunch time here. And this investigation has been beset with delays. Remember, they went to the Supreme Court twice to try to get Trump's accounting firm records. They did win them and they got them. There's a current ongoing fight that's under seal over a subpoena to the Trump Organization. So, there's a lot that's still at stake here. These cases are very difficult to bring. So if Vance doesn't make a decision in the next 5 weeks, then that will fall to his successor, the new DA, who will be Alvin Bragg. He is an experienced prosecutor, worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan and also at the New York Attorney General's office.
Do you know if he wants this on his plate or if he will pursue it as passionately as Cyrus Vance did?
So, it's always an interesting question. This case is more of Vance's legacy and having to come into something new. Now, everyone that I've spoken to who has worked with Alvin Bragg, who knows him very well, say that he will take a fresh look at this. He will not look at this through a political lens, and that he will apply all of these judgments as he had over his career to look at this evidence. But, it is an interesting question, because will he want this to be something that will define his early days in office?
Kara Scannell, thank you so much for that reporting. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Let's bring back in CNN senior legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Ellie Honig. Ellie, what's your reaction to this news that Calamari seems to be safe right now?
Caitlin, it tells me that the tax fraud investigation is largely a dud. If they don't have the goods to charge Matthew Calamari, there's no way they're going to have the goods to charge Donald Trump or any of the Trump children. It looks like all they're going to get out of that is the charge against Alan Weisselberg and the Trump organization. And the charge against Alan Weisselberg looks to be well supported. But frankly, if he gets convicted, he has a chance to not even go to prison, given the nature of the charges in New York State. And then the indictment of the Trump organization sounds like something, but no individual can go to prison when a corporation is indicted. So it looks to me like that part of the case, the tax fraud part of the case, is really at a dead end.
Yeah, and so Kara said they're kind of returning to the initial part of it, which is essentially, did he defraud potential lenders by overinflating the value of his properties? That seems to be pretty difficult to prove potentially. And I think what she said about the timeline there is really interesting. Cyrus Vance, the district attorney in Manhattan, did not seek a fourth term, and he is essentially, his window is closing to work on this. So what do you predict when it comes to the timeline based on these developments?
Yeah, so Alvin Bragg, who's taking over as the DA starting in January, I should say, is a former colleague of mine, a personal friend of mine. People should know that. But Cy Vance is going to leave Alvin Bragg in a difficult position here. If I'm going in as the DA, and this case is still unresolved and still out there, I'm thinking, boy, thank you for leaving me with this mess. Now, as to the inflation and deflation of assets part of the case, like you said, Caitlin, easier said than done, easier said than proved as a prosecutor. It's not enough to just say, well, they had this building, they valued it high over here and they valued it low over here. You have to show that a person, anyone you want to charge, specifically knew about that and was part of it. And I don't see how they get there on Donald Trump now. We know he's not an emailer. We know he's not a texter. There's not going to be some smoking gun document. And they don't appear to have a cooperator who's in position to do that.
Joining us to talk about this, CNN political analyst and Washington correspondent for the New York Times, Maggie Haberman. Maggie, happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
I know you're exactly where you want to be this Thanksgiving morning, talking to us.
And are you?
But listen,
we all are, really.
It goes without saying. There's nowhere I'd rather be, as far as you know. What are we to take away from where the Manhattan DA is right now, as he is about to leave office?
Yeah, it's John, a really important point that Cy Vance is on his way out. What we had been hearing for a while was that Vance hoped to make the charging decision related to former President Trump, if there was going to be a charge or not, before he left. That's obviously not happening, just given the pace of this. Calamari is safe for now, as you said. It does not mean that he is necessarily never going to be charged. They have a new special grand jury that's going forward, but this is going to drag on for some time. And the longer this drags on, the more questions it's going to raise about whether they are able to prove criminality to a significant degree at a trial with the former president. And at the end of the day, I think that if Donald Trump does not get charged personally, even though his company is charged, he is going to see this as some kind of victory.
And Maggie, I also want to ask you about this reporting about who is paying some of the former president's legal bills, which is the Republican National Committee, typically supposed to be a neutral organization and not favor one candidate, potential candidate, over another. Clearly, they're paying some of his legal bills, even though it doesn't pertain to when he was in office. And so what are you hearing from people? Because we know there are some GOP officials telling CNN that nothing about this is normal.
No, that's right, Caitlin. Look, there is, number one, it's not shocking that Donald Trump will never spend a dollar of his own money that he doesn't have to. But what is shocking is the degree to which groups who are not within his immediate orbit are going along with it. And it speaks to the hold that he still has on aspects of the party. Now, my understanding is that this was a committee vote within the RNC and that there was more pushback than you might have expected. There were some people who did not want to go along with this. We'll see if that number increases over time. But this is really unheard of. It's not unusual for a political committee to pay for legal fees related to a sitting executive. So we saw that with governors, over the course of the last many, many years. We saw this with President Trump when he was president. He no longer is, and this has nothing to do with his presidency. So this is pretty extraordinary.
I mean, if you're Ron DeSantis or Chris Christie or any of these potential 2024 candidates, what do you think? You're like, hey, RNC, what are you doing here? You are helping politically someone who we may be running against for the nomination.
Look, this has been the concern the whole time about the fact that a lot of the party apparatus has ties to the former president. Again, not totally unusual when you have an outgoing president, and the former president, former nominee of any party is the leader until there's another nominee, but you don't normally see something like this, and you don't normally have so many fears within a party, John, and you know this, that the former president, I have always been very skeptical of the idea that he was ever serious about forming his own party, no matter what he said at the time. He let it go a few days later as he was leaving office that he might go form a third party. He doesn't really have the organization or the ability to do that, but what he does have the ability to do is depress turnout, and among Republicans, and we saw that in the two Georgia Senate runoffs in January, and that's what party officials are afraid of. So essentially, he's got his boot on their neck still, and they're not. And there are members of the party who like him, but at the end of the day, this is just a highly unusual situation.
It is Friday, the 26th of November of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Yes, folks, the party goes on. Well, how was your Thanksgiving? Did you eat enough? Yes. I guess Thanksgiving is a day to gorge. I tend to not do that anymore. Back in the day when I was about a mere child, I would, but I had the metabolism to burn it off. Not so much now. Cooked most of the day, and of course, when I cook, it doesn't matter whether I test my food or not. At some point, I kind of lose my appetite. Though I had a fair appetite when we had dinner. Turned out pretty well. I had mentioned that we had invited the neighbors over. The reason that they actually didn't go on their trip is that they have a relatively new dog. They've only had it for about a year, and has had a few medical issues. So they wouldn't be able to have taken the dog on their trip, and they couldn't leave the dog alone for a couple of days either. So we invited them over, had plenty of food for just my mother and I, more than enough, and I was a bit worried about, some things don't freeze well. So what are we going to do? Well, fortunately, we had neighbors, and we fed them as well. So that worked out wonderfully. The turkey turned out the way I wanted. My homemade stuffing sucked, but oh well. I'll live and learn. I actually made a bit of a mistake. I had toasted the bread a little too much. It should only be lightly toasted. And the charcoal of the toasting really came through. Now, I didn't burn the toast, but I just toasted it a tad too much. And the recipe that I was following, and one should never, adhere to just the recipe, it really required a lot more moisture for the ingredients that were there. And as I said, live and learn. Well, it's only stuffing, so it was all right. I had appropriate side dishes, a few appetizers, and football on in the background, because that's what you do on Thanksgiving, at least some of us. Are we changing the name of Thanksgiving now? I think the right wing is really afraid that what they call Turkey Day is going to be changed from Thanksgiving to something. People were calling it Turkey Day, and I used to think, you know what? What are you, a Republican? And they would be. And so I call it Thanksgiving, kind of a day of mourning, actually. But so anyway, in that day of mourning, people do congregate to, maybe mourn together and give thanks that we're still surviving. Yes. So now it's Friday, and we have the leftovers, those of us who have food to eat. I sometimes feel hesitant about speaking of the feasts that I've taken part in, knowing that there are a lot of hungry people out there. So gloating over gorging yourself on food seems particularly cruel if those people who have not enough to eat are hearing about it. So, well, I didn't like jumping on a line of ants either. It just seemed particularly cruel and wrong. Well, we have the weekend coming up. It looks like Joe Biden's going to be blamed for everything. You know, it really cracked me up. I made a joke that the right wing was just all up in arms about Joe raising the price of gas. Like he could raise the price of gas. Or his incompetence would raise the price of gas. That's what they're trying to get at. When we all know, well, we should all know, that the gas prices, petrol prices, are set on the spot market, the international spot market. Now, who controls that mostly? Well, that would be OPEC. And there's ways to mitigate what OPEC does, and Joe just did that. So I made a joke that when they were whining about Joe raising the price of gas, which he's not able to do, I just made the joke like, well, you know, then they'll just blame Joe for lowering the price of gas at the pump. And that's exactly what they're doing. When he tapped into the strategic oil reserve, now granted, this is not a long-term fix. It's only a short-term fix. And there's some question whether gas prices would have immediately gone down anyway. They wouldn't. But now the right wing is what I made a joke about, complaining that he's lowering the price of gas. He's such a commie. Jeez. Then they whined because he went to Nantucket. He always goes to Nantucket on the holidays. Always. And he's been in government for, you know, I wouldn't say forever, but it is forever for some of us. Yeah. So I read that, you know, they, with a capital T, would complain if Joe went to a Best Western. He's so disrespectful to the presidency, going to a hovel like the Best Westerns. It doesn't matter. Everything that we do is illegitimate. We are not allowed to be able to hold power, whatever that means. And I think that a lot of us are getting tired of it, since there's a lot more of us than them. And the only reason they get away with it is because we have big hearts. We don't want to hurt people needlessly. We don't even want to hurt people when it's needed. Can't we all just get along? Yeah, we would like to, except, you know, it's one thing for us to say let's get along, and another thing for the other side to say F you. You can't force me to be nice. Really? I think that's a given. It is really quite odd that this whole argument has really boiled down to, I don't want to be a good person. I don't want to be compassionate. I don't want to care about other people. I don't want those who are less fortunate than me to have a leg up. That's what it really boils down to. I want to be better than everybody else, no matter what. You mean even if it means your own demise? At least I'll die better than you. Okay, it's a death cult. We already have these QAnon people saying that death is the ultimate, I don't know, whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. Yeah. You know, we went from, we got to ban these books to book burning. We went from, we got to, overturn an election. If it doesn't happen, we're going to kill ourselves. Well, Heaven's Gate is right over there. Put on a tracksuit. Hail Bop will be by in a moment. Jeez. And apparently, we are illegitimate. We are incompetent. We are weak. We are the ones that are trying to tear down all our traditions. Really? Who stormed the Capitol to circumvent the peaceful transition of power? If you want to talk about tradition. Jesus, even the weathermen didn't do that. The SLA didn't do that. The yippies didn't do that. Who did? The ones that we knew every day that they would be the Nazis that would do it, and they did. And we warned people. Driftglass has said it before. I told you so. Driftglass is just ignored because he's a hippie. Well, you know what? A lot of us are not hippies. We're punks. You can kick a hippie, but punks kick back. It's time to really start kicking, don't you think? Yes, it is. What's on the rest of the menu here on the day after Thanksgiving Day? Well, some people take this day off, but we didn't. Because, hey, what else are we going to do this early in the morning on the West Coast? Sleep? Yeah, right. Well, on the rest of the menu, and actually starting on the top, the Manhattan prosecutors informed Trump Organization executive Matthew Calamari. Wow. You know, if you cook that guy too much, it's really rubbery. Yeah, don't do it. Don't cook that guy too much. Well, they don't intend to charge him with any crimes for now. Probably because, you know, the guy's a bodyguard, and I got to say, somewhat of a dimwit. He's a leg breaker. Calling him a chief executive, a COO. Yes, I don't think the title says everything about what the guy is. It doesn't. It's really conflating what the guy is. He's not an executive. He doesn't know as much as Michael Cohen knows. And Wasselberg is the fish they want to get. Calamari, he's really much lower on the rung. Don't we know that? Yes, we do. On the rest of the menu, after working for the company for 26 years, when the plant closed in 2018, Ernest Ray applied for and got unemployment benefits. Now, Virginia wants him to pay it all back. What? New electoral maps sparked debate over majority-minority districts, and we're talking about white people and people of color. And Target will keep its stores closed on Thanksgiving for good. Well, that's good. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where South African scientists have detected a new and deadly virus variant amid a spike in infections. And 1,600 migrants have been lost at sea in the Mediterranean this year. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link. Yes, the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of the chat room link, to the left across the page near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could afford to send us the equivalent of, say, how about an espresso type coffee drink? If you could send those funds to us once a month, it really helps us pay our bills and continue this resistance of the hostile takeover of the United States of America. We cannot allow it to happen, and we won't. We punched and beat the Nazis before. We're going to have to do it again. All right? So, Why am I asking for money to pay our bills? Because we need it. The bills keep increasing. The machinery, the cost of that keeps increasing. God knows the software costs keep increasing. And though we pull most of the money out of our own wallets to keep this powerhouse of resistance resisting, we still need your help. And your help has sustained us and helped us all these many years, and we thank you. And we're going to need some more in the future, too, because that's just the way of the world. But anyway, thank you for your generosity. We do take this quite seriously here, even with the jocular, gallows humor. How else can we survive? Thank you anyway for all that generosity. And we're going to continue making these entreaties because, the way of the world is that the bills keep going up. Darn them. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so by going to @NetrootsRadio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. And also thank you for sending out our what we're thankful for yesterday on Thanksgiving Day. We are thankful for all the folks that we have as content here at Netroots Radio, and also those who are our allies. And we are very thankful. And thank you, Tom, for putting that out. If you would like to follow me on Twitter, you can do so at Justice Putnam. I incidentally post the show notes and links diary. Yes, it's a diary, not a story. Okay? Those of us of a certain age know it as a diary. Anyway, I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime, and then get that linked up on Twitter and those other social media platforms, and you know which one I am talking about. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so at Cookbook West. And please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Sometimes under a rock. Really? Yeah, sometimes. All right, this first offering comes out of the Associated Press by Sarah Rankin. For 26 years, Ernest Ray worked at a company in Southwest Virginia that made compressors in a physically demanding job that involved night shifts on a factory floor. When the plant closed in 2018, Ray applied for and received about $9,000 in unemployment benefits. 3 years later, Ray is fighting the Virginia Employment Commission in court as the agency tries to take the money back. It's a case that, as Ray's pro bono attorney sees it, illustrates the ethos of a radically dysfunctional agency, like the teacher who doesn't like children or the librarian who doesn't like books. This is an agency that doesn't like the people that it's supposed to serve, said Hugh O'Donnell, who has done decades of unemployment compensation work. The agency has been under scrutiny for the past year and a half for a response that, by some measures, was among the nation's worst to a surge in jobless claims due to the coronavirus pandemic. But cases like Ray's, interviews with attorneys and state audits show the agency was plagued with a wide range of problems for years before the pandemic. They were simply brought to the forefront when hundreds of thousands of workers suddenly needed help. Republican Governor-elect Glenn Youngkin campaigned on a promise to overhaul the agency, and Virginia Labor Secretary Megan Healy, who oversees it now, also says some problems are structural. She says the agency has long lacked sufficient resources thanks to a complicated federal funding formula that pays out less when the economy is strong, and has also penalized the agency's inefficiencies. Outside reviews have warned of problems going back nearly a decade, including a major records management issue, low staff morale, and unclean facilities. During the pandemic, the agency lagged in setting up certain benefit programs and allowed backlogs of cases to pile up, prompting a class action lawsuit. An information technology modernization project 8 years behind schedule exacerbated the situation, leaving claimants reliant on physical mail, thank you to Joy, and call centers that a recent audit found were only answering about 12% of the calls. Virginia, which has relatively limited benefits, also has starkly low recipiency rates among the unemployed, with the third lowest average rate in the nation over the past 2 decades, the audit found. The system is just broken. There's no way to describe it, said Martin Wegbright, director of litigation at the Central Virginia Legal Aid Society. President Joe Biden's administration has said the pandemic exposed long-standing challenges in the unemployment insurance system nationwide and that it needs comprehensive reform. For Ray, the struggles with the agency began well before it was flooded with pandemic-related claims. Deaf since birth, Ray spent decades making complicated machinery at Bristol compressors. During his shifts, he wore safety glasses, gloves, an apron, and steel-toed boots that sometimes grew heavier when soaked with leaking coolant. And that was Ray had said that in an interview with his niece interpreting. A former colleague, David Woodring, called him a gentleman and honest, top-of-the-line guy who never missed work and performed a job that required a great deal of skill. Ray made about $36,000 a year in the last year of work at the company, which closed despite receiving millions in taxpayer-funded incentives. Ray's wages qualified him for $378 a week for 24 weeks, according to the records in this case. Ray, who is age 57, with worn hands and a big white beard, began receiving those benefits without issue. He started looking for a new job and meanwhile drove about 30 miles each way to an employment commission office in Bristol to comply with the state's weekly work search documentation requirements. He did not have a computer to do the paperwork online. When his benefits ran out in May of 2019, staff instructed him, for reasons that are unclear, to keep reporting his work search details. Ray then missed 1 week due to a minor illness. After producing a doctor's note, he received a notice saying he had been deemed unable to work. An applicant must be eligible to work to receive benefits, and they said he was unable to work due to medical reasons and had received his payments in error. The state wanted the money back. O'Donnell, a former executive director of a legal aid clinic, said none of it makes any sense. The doctor's note, which is included in the lengthy case file, expressly said Ray was not incapacitated. Ray appealed, but did so 3 weeks late, according to his lawsuit. Fluent only in American Sign Language, he had trouble reading the tiny print of the agency's notice and understanding the bureaucratic language. Ray's case has since been winding its way through the Employment Commission appeals process. Shouldn't it be winding? At each stage, the state has fought him on the basis of his late appeal, not on the merits of the case. The commission never explained its reason for seeking the repayment, O'Donnell said, blaming Ray at one point for an alleged lack of diligence. Joyce Fogg, a commission spokeswoman, refused to comment on the specifics of the case. A spokeswoman for Attorney General Mark Herring declined to comment on the litigation. Labor Secretary Healy and top commission officials have defended the work of the agency's employees, who faced an unprecedented surge of applications amid the pandemic, changing federal guidance and confrontations, including death threats from irate individuals. Despite the flood of commission-related complaints, state officials have so far shown little appetite to push for sweeping reforms. A scathing audit released by a watchdog agency this month made 40 recommendations for changes and faulted the administration of outgoing Democratic Governor Ralph Northam for waiting too long to address problems as pandemic-related claims surged. It also noted weak oversight from the federal government from the Federal Department of Labor and urged the General Assembly to do more. Ray and his niece say he was unable to find another job, largely because of his deafness. He is now getting by on Social Security disability benefits that started well after his unemployment benefits ended. He said he doesn't have the money to repay the state and worries constantly about his case. I lost my job, and then it's like something that should have been in place to help me find something else just turned into a bigger mess. David Eggert and Nicholas Riccardi of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here. The Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Adam Hollier is a lieutenant in the Army Reserves, a paratrooper, Detroit native, a Democrat, and a black man. He is also a state senator who represents a majority black district that stretches across the northeastern edge of his economically battered and resilient hometown. That critical mass of black voters, Hollier argues, ensures he has a chance to be elected and give voice to people who have long been ignored by the political system. Rebecca Zatella is a lawyer who describes herself as an independent and a white woman who chairs Michigan's new Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. Its job is to redraw the lines of legislative seats to promote more partisan competition in a state where Republicans have dominated the legislature for decades. One of the best ways to do that and empower minority voters, Zatella said, and other commissioners are... Rebecca Zatella is a lawyer who describes herself as an independent and a white woman who chairs Michigan's new Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. Its job is to redraw the lines of legislative seats to promote more partisan competition in a state where Republicans have dominated the legislature for decades. One of the best ways to do that and empower minority voters, Zatella and other commissioners argue, is putting some of the majority black neighborhoods in Hollier's district in other seats, where they may have more say over Michigan's leadership. For Hollier's 2nd Senate district, that means some of his Detroit neighborhoods would be grafted onto mostly white districts, and his own seat would stretch across 8 Mile Road, the infamous boundary between Detroit and its first ring, majority white suburbs. Its black voting age population would drop to 42%. Hollier, like other black makers, is furious, saying that move jeopardizes black elected officials. By and large, black people vote for black people and white people vote for white people, Hollier said. It's just the reality. It's got nothing to do with me. Draw maps that majority black communities can win. Whether Hollier is right is at the heart of a heated debate over how to ensure racial and ethnic minority communities can elect the office holders of their choice. The fight is complicated and wonky, like most surrounding the once-a-decade redistricting process, but the stakes are clear. Black, Latino, and Asian Americans are underrepresented in state legislatures. For decades, the widely accepted strategy was to group together black voters so they comprised a majority in state house or congressional districts. That principle was enshrined in the Federal Voting Rights Act, which requires the creation of districts with a majority or plurality of black or other minority racial or ethnic group, those voters in places where the white population has a history of preventing them from electing their chosen representatives. That strategy was reinforced by partisan politics. Republicans have been happy to draw districts with large numbers of black voters because black voters overwhelmingly favor Democrats. The effect was to pack Democrats into just a few districts and leave other parts of the state more safely Republican. But politics has changed dramatically since the law was passed in 1965. Now, only 18 of the 53 members of the Congressional Black Caucus were elected in districts that are majority African American. Rising black politicians like Representative Antonio Delgado and Joe Neguse represent heavily white areas in New York's Hudson River Valley and Boulder, Colorado, respectively. I think we're in a new age now, said Bakari Sellers, an African-American former South Carolina state legislature. If you're talented enough, you can win in a 30-35% black district. We can be more competitive around the country, but that is a hard sell to some lawmakers and advocates pushing to put more people of color in state houses and Congress. Black legislators make up less than 10% of legislatures in the whole U.S., although 14.2% of the population is black. And Latinos are 18.7% of the population and just 5.3% of state lawmakers. Asians comprise 2% of legislators, but 7.2% of the population. In Nevada, Latino and other activist groups opposed maps drawn by the Democratic-controlled legislature because the plan spread Latinos broadly around the state's congressional and legislative districts to increase the odds of Democratic victories. In Wisconsin, Democratic Governor Tony Evers asked the commission to propose maps to counter ones drawn by the GOP-controlled legislature, but black and Latino Democrats objected to the commission's maps because they would scatter minority voters across several districts. The risks in balancing the racial composition of districts was illustrated in this month's Virginia elections. 2 black Democratic delegates narrowly lost their seats in districts that were still majority African American, but had recently been redrawn to have fewer black voters. Control of the House of Delegates will come down to 2 other races that are in recounts. Jonathan Service, one of the experts who redrew the Virginia districts in 2019, said the aim was to rectify what a court had found was discrimination against black voters. He argued that the Voting Rights Act does not guarantee black legislators will always be reelected. The problem is the Democrats had a bad election, Service said. Still, the shift toward unpacking districts is likely to lead to turnover in legislators in Congress. In North Carolina, a new GOP-approved map cut the share of black voters in Democratic Representative G.K. Butterfield's district from 45 to 38%. The 9-term African-American congressman announced his resignation this month and called the new map racially gerrymandered. Here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by the Associated Press by way of the American Independent. Target will no longer open its stores on Thanksgiving Day, making permanent a shift to the unofficial start of the holiday season that was suspended during the pandemic. To limit crowds in stores, retailers last year were forced to turn what had become a weekend shopping blitz into an extended event, with big holiday discounts beginning as early as October. That forced shift appears to have been fortuitous. U.S. holiday sales last November and December rose 8.2% in 2020 from the previous year. And that was, according to the National Retail Federation, the nation's largest retail trade group. The group predicts 2021 could shatter that record, growing between 8.5% to 10.5%. Americans able to get the same offers over a broader time span and relieved from some of the stresses that go hand in hand with the holidays appeared to embrace the change, which has also resonated with workers, Target said. What started as a temporary measure driven by the pandemic is now our new standard, one that recognizes our ability to deliver on our guests' holiday wishes both within and well beyond store hours. Target CEO Brian Cornell wrote in a note to employees, "You don't have to wonder whether this is the last Thanksgiving you'll spend with family and friends for a while, because Thanksgiving store hours are one thing we won't get back to when the pandemic finally subsides." Well, good for Target. That brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world and finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, The Trouble with Troubles. Well, Kenneth Branagh's new movie Belfast is placed in that city in the late 1960s, the era of the violent, sectarian so-called troubles there. It's really more of a coming-of-age story, and an autobiographical one at that. So in a project like this, the needle that requires threading is to not trivialize or whitewash a truly horrific period, but also not to make dark and bloody drama not suitable for holiday release. The way that's done here is by making a family-centric movie with fairly low narrative stakes and just enough era ambiance to keep it at least not divorced from reality. The story here is told from the point of view of Buddy, a 10-year-old, about Branagh's age in '69, whose perception of the theological Catholic-Protestant dispute is actually quite precious. His caring parents argue, but never to the point of ugliness. He has adorable and wise grandparents, with these characters brought off by Katrina Balfe as Buddy's mom, Judi Dench as his grandmother, Jamie Dornan as the dad, and the Irish patriarch standard-bearer Ciarán Hinds as grandpa. And they all do a fine job, even if you've seen these characters before. The shooting here is black and white with color reserved for certain scenes like trips to the movies. Musical direction is from Belfast native Van Morrison, who places several of his own radio hits early on. Seems somebody noticed this after they'd been cut in, and in later acts we get other music. And to seal the autobiographical hints, maybe overmuch, we see Buddy reading a Thor comic. We all idealize our youth, so it's probably unreasonable to expect a filmmaker not to as well. The acting, directing, and cinematography in Belfast rescue it from the saccharine, but not by much. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. During the Anglo-Saxon period, which lasted from about 410 AD until 1066 AD, many different tribes ruled Britain, and each tribe was headed by a warlord or king. Occasionally, a single ruler would emerge, called a Bretwalda. Warriors called Thanes were the second most powerful Anglo-Saxons. They helped the kings rule each kingdom. Below the Thanes were the churls, who were free farmers, tradesmen, or laborers who had to serve the king as a soldier in times of crisis. As soldiers, they had the right to bear arms. Below the churls were the slaves, who worked for the Thane and had to do manual labor. Kinship, or family ties, were the strongest bonds in Anglo-Saxon society. Anglo-Saxon justice was rather harsh. If a person were found guilty of a crime, he would have to pay a fine, or would have his hand or nose cut off, or would be executed. The term wergild meant a monetary payment that had to be made to a person who suffered an injury. If a person were killed, the payment went to that person's family. If a slave were killed, the payment went to the slave holder. The higher a person's rank in Anglo-Saxon society, the greater the person's wergild. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1867. That was the day that J.B. Sutherland of Detroit patented the first specialized refrigerated railroad car. Sutherland's design included ice tanks at both ends of the car and ventilation flaps on the floor, which used gravity to send a draft of cold air flowing throughout the car. Sutherland could find no investors interested in financing his railroad cars on the railroad lines. However, in 1868, William Davis devised a newer refrigerated car which allowed meat and poultry to be shipped across the United States. Davis sold his refrigerated car patent to George H. Hammond. Hammond was a Detroit meat packer. He used the new car to transport meat from Michigan to Boston. Hammond became a meat shipping tycoon because of Davis's invention. Refrigerated cars revolutionized the meat packing industry. Previous methods of shipping meat were not the best. Gustavus Swift, a Chicago meatpacking owner, had tried using bins of ice in boxcars and went so far as attempting to use boxcars with no doors to keep the meat cool. Finally, Swift perfected the refrigerated boxcar, improving on the ideas of both Sutherland and Davis. The Swift meatpacking operation was located on the south side of Chicago. The refrigerated car centralized meatpacking and helped to make Chicago, as poet Carl Sandburg wrote, the hog butcher for the world. At its peak, the stockyards employed more than 50,000 workers. One Swift competitor, Armour & Company, could butcher more than 1,200 hogs an hour. During the 1890s, 12 million cattle and hogs were slaughtered in Chicago, and the meat was distributed throughout the nation by rail car. The stockyards became an important site of labor organizing, especially for the Congress of Industrial Organizations in the late 1930s.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 36 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting only a high of around 52. Overnight lows tonight in the low 40s, will be mainly cloudy today and tonight with winds light and variable. Highs will be getting up to about 60 tomorrow with winds light and variable, and looks like we will have some drier weather, meaning there won't be precipitation falling from the sky for over a week, which would be good. Speaking of which, the air quality index for the region is good at 24 parts per million. The daytime UV index is low at level 1. We're going to skip right to weather from around the world, and weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. London is 44 and partly cloudy. Paris is 44 with rain. Rome is 53 and mostly cloudy. Kyiv is 42 and fair. Kabul is 46 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 65 and clear. Tokyo is 50 degrees and clear. Sydney, Australia is 61 with clouds and heavy wind. San Francisco, California is 50 degrees and fair. And New York is 45 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Andrew Meldrum and Montgomery of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A new coronavirus variant has been detected in South Africa that scientists say is a concern because of its high number of mutations and rapid spread among young people. In Gauteng, the country's most populous province, Health Minister Joe Fala announced yesterday, Thursday. The coronavirus evolves as it spreads, and many new variants, including those with worrying mutations, often just die out. Scientists monitor for possible changes that could be more transmissible or deadly, but sorting out whether new variants will have a public health impact can take time. South Africa has seen a dramatic rise in new infections, Fala said at an online news briefing. Over the last 4 or 5 days, there have been more of an exponential rise, he said, adding that the new variant appears to be driving the spike in cases. Scientists in South Africa are working to determine what percentage of the new cases have been caused by the new variant.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Carl Ritter of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. The sinking of a boat with more than 30 people on board this week is the deadliest migration tragedy to date in the English Channel. Migrant shipwrecks of that scale, however, are not uncommon in the waters surrounding Europe's southern borders. This year alone, UN officials estimate that 1,600 people have died or gone missing in the Mediterranean Sea, the main gateway to Europe for migrants trying to enter the continent with the help of human smugglers. The death toll is higher than last year, but by no means unique. The International Organization of Migration estimates that 23,000 people have perished since 2014 while trying to cross the Mediterranean in rickety boats or rubber dinghies. Just last week, 85 people died in 2 separate incidents while trying to reach Italy from Libya. This year, the busiest and deadliest migrant route to Europe is the central Mediterranean, where people travel in crowded boats from Libya and Tunisia toward Italy. About 60,000 people have arrived in Italy by sea this year, and some 1,200 have died or disappeared on the journey, according to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Well, that sad note brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we're going to meet up here on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.